Some true stories we can never prove. They begin with something someone swore they saw, somewhere they probably shouldn't have been looking. And out here, where the land lies so flat it feels as though the world could go on forever, there is one such story. A story that may be true, but is probably better if it's not. The werewolf has haunted our imagination for centuries, a creature neither wholly man nor wholly beast, condemned to walk on two legs one moment and four the next, answering only to the pull of the moon. Whether you believe such things or not almost doesn't matter, because the oldest legends have a habit of surviving, and this one begins in the Lincolnshire fens.
Today we find ourselves in Lincolnshire. Now, what happened is I found an old local folklore tale about a werewolf, and it was actually quite terrifying. Now, the werewolf is half man, it's half beast. Some of these stories suggest that because the wolves, natural wolves, used to thrive in the habitats around here long ago, that some of those wolves ventured into graveyards at night, stole corpses, ate them, and then we ended up with this half beast, half man mythological creature. There's obviously other variations of how the werewolf came about, and we will get into that later on in this video. But I'm not going to give too much away now. Let's get straight on to it. So thank you to everybody that supports the channel, thanks to the members, thanks to the subscribers, and everybody that sends donations to help this journey keep going. I really do appreciate it. That's enough waffle though, let's wander. Found ourselves in Langrick, which is a rural part of Lincolnshire. It's a low-lying part of the Lincolnshire fens. It's around 5 miles from Boston, about 24 miles southeast of Lincoln.
Our story begins some years ago, and like any good historical story, starts with a man and his spade. The man of our story lived in Langrick, and he had an unusual curiosity about what lay beneath the earth. Now, Lincolnshire as a rule is a county of endless landscapes, peat bogs and outstretching fields. And beneath all that, well, whatever came before. So this young man, we'll call him an archaeologist, spent much of his free time wandering across the fields in search of hidden treasure. And now a footnote for you. I must say at this point that Lincolnshire has long been famous for its peat, rich organic soils and glorious silts that act as an incredible natural time capsule for archaeologists. The waterlogged, oxygen-poor conditions slow decay so dramatically that bacteria and fungi struggle to survive. It's the reason bog bodies have been discovered over the years. Ancient human remains so remarkably preserved that scientists have been able to study their hair, skin, and even the contents of their last meal. Perhaps the young man of our story hoped to discover a bog body, perhaps a Roman coin, but whatever it was, he spent hours over the fens, spade under his arm, digging away with curiosity and conviction. On one particular day, when the air was still and the morning was drawing to a close, he felt his spade strike something hard. Expecting another tree root, he knelt down and began brushing away the peat with his hands. Before long, and with great care, he uncovered what appeared to be a human leg bone. Slowly but surely, he continued to dig, until several more bones began to emerge. Now, remember what I said about the peat? Finding a body preserved in these conditions was unusual enough, but finding nothing more than a skeleton was stranger still, some would say even impossible. And so we arrive at our first conundrum. Half expecting to uncover the skull of this long-forgotten soul, the man continued his careful search. His hands and trowel worked patiently as the afternoon faded and the light began to soften around him. Eventually, he found what he believed to be the head. Only, it wasn't. This was no human skull. It belonged to a large dog, or perhaps a wolf. With daylight disappearing, the young man gathered the bones into a large Hessian sack, threw it over his shoulder and made the short walk back to his cottage. It was there that he could finally examine his discovery more carefully. As he pushed open the door, the cottage had already filled with shadows. The last of the daylight was disappearing, and he felt his way across the room until his fingers found the oil lamps. As their warm glow flickered into life, he cleared the kitchen table and carefully laid each bone before him. One by one he cleaned away the dirt that had hidden them for many, many years, until, piece by piece, a complete human skeleton lay before him. He was certain of it, but he could not explain the skull. Rotating it slowly in his hands, he ran his fingers along the long jaw, pressing his thumb carefully against one of the pointed teeth. Without a shadow of a doubt, this belonged to a wolf. Not wishing to be carried away by fanciful ideas, the young man reached what he believed to be the only sensible conclusion. Travelling fairs. They were well known for displaying strange curiosities, cleverly assembled oddities designed to amaze paying crowds. Surely this was nothing more than one of those. It would certainly explain why there was no trace of flesh or preservation. Whoever had buried it had buried a skeleton, not a body. Satisfied that he'd solved the mystery, he left the remains upon the table. But excitement had slowly given way to exhaustion. Rubbing the tiredness from his eyes, he locked the cottage door, extinguished the lamps, and made his way upstairs, quietly pleased with what had turned into a most unusual day. Some time after midnight, he awoke. At first it was difficult to say what had disturbed him. The cottage lay silent. Only the sound of his own breathing filled the room. And then, another noise. A faint movement somewhere beyond the back of the house. He listened. Nothing. Convinced it was probably some animal nosing around outside, he climbed from his bed and stepped cautiously into the darkness. Before he had taken more than a few steps, tap, tap, tap. 3 deliberate knocks against the window, followed by what he was almost certain was a low growl. Turning towards the sound, he caught his own reflection in the glass, but slowly another shape began to appear beyond it. At first it was only an outline, then his eyes adjusted. Broad across the shoulders, standing perfectly still, almost as though it was waiting for him to notice it. The body belonged to a man. The head did not. A long snout, pointed ears, teeth catching what little light escaped through the window. And then it blinked. The young man couldn't move, neither could the creature. For several long seconds they simply stared at one another. Then the beast slowly drew back its lip, revealing a row of pointed teeth, and it snarled. Raising an arm, it struck the window with tremendous force. Glass exploded across the floor. The young man fled upstairs and bolted the bedroom door behind him. The beast did not follow. Instead, he could hear it moving through the kitchen below. Chairs being dragged across the floor, furniture crashing over, heavy footsteps pacing through the cottage. With his back pressed firmly against the bedroom door and his heart pounding in his chest, he waited with bated breath until the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the windows. Several hours passed in complete silence before he finally gathered enough courage to leave the room. Slowly making his way downstairs, he let out a relieved gasp. His visitor had gone. The window lay shattered, the furniture was scattered across the room, and the bones? The bones were no longer resting neatly upon the table. They lay strewn across the floor amongst the wreckage. He wasted no time. Certain that whatever had visited him during the night was somehow connected to his discovery, he gathered every last bone, picked up his spade, and returned to the very spot in the fen where he had first unearthed them. One by one he lowered each piece back into the earth, the leg bones, the ribs, the spine, and finally, the wolf skull. He covered the grave once more with layers of peat until no trace of it remained. Then he turned and walked home. I imagine he looked over his shoulder more than once, but thankfully he never saw the creature again. What he witnessed that day and throughout that long night became a story he would repeat for years afterwards. Some laughed, some quietly shook their heads and changed the subject, but one man thought it was important enough to write down Had he done not, perhaps the werewolf of Dogdyke would have disappeared into the fen forever.
Looking back, the story seems to have originally started in a book called The Fen County by Christopher Marlowe, which came out in 1925, I believe. I couldn't find any earlier indication of this story, so some people say that Marlowe made it up. Whether he did or whether he didn't, it certainly got the imaginations flowing. Lots more werewolf stories were on people's minds. And it's interesting, we've spoken about this in the past in other folklore sort of stories, about how imagination can grow from other people's tales. But obviously, this wasn't the first werewolf story that had ever been. There have been werewolf stories told all over the world, going back years and years and years.
What intrigues me the most about the werewolf isn't the creature itself, it's just how old the idea turned out to be. At first I assumed the werewolf belonged almost entirely to medieval Europe. In reality, stories of people changing into animals appear across the world, although they don't always involve wolves. Some of the earliest surviving written accounts come from ancient Greece. One tells of King Lycaon, a ruler who, according to myth, served human flesh to Zeus in an attempt to test whether the god was truly divine. Zeus was said to punish him by transforming him into a wolf, a story so enduring that it even gave us the word lycanthropy, which is still used today to describe the legend of the werewolf. As centuries have passed, the idea continued to evolve. Across Europe, particularly during the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, stories of werewolves became increasingly common. In some places they were viewed as servants of the devil. In others they were victims of a curse, trapped in a body that was no longer entirely their own. By the 16th and 17th centuries, belief had become so widespread that, in parts of Europe, people were genuinely put on trial for allegedly being werewolves. It sounds extraordinary today, but the court records still exist. Britain, however, tells a slightly different story. Although we certainly have tales of werewolves, our folklore has always seemed rather more interested in another creature as well, the black dog. Now, depending on where you are in the country, and please do let me know in the comments if this tale sounds familiar to where you live, the black dog goes by different names. So in East Anglia, it's perhaps best known as Black Shuck, a huge black dog often described with glowing eyes and said to haunt lonely roads, churchyards and wild places. Lincolnshire has its own collection of black dog legends too, although they don't always agree with one another. Some describe them as ghostly guardians, others see them as warnings of death or misfortune. A few are simply large, unexplained animals glimpsed in the half-light before disappearing altogether. So it's easy to see how, over hundreds of years, these stories could begin to overlap. A large black animal seen crossing a lonely road, a wolf-like creature glimpsed on the edge of a field, a tale retold often enough that each generation adds another detail. Whether they're describing the same thing is impossible to say, but one thing is certain, Lincolnshire has never been short of stories, especially once the sun goes down.
According to a YouGov survey, only 70% of British people believe that werewolves definitely do not exist. The rest, it consists of obviously people that think they might not exist, people that think they probably don't exist, and people that think they do exist. So it's quite an interesting number, really. I suppose, in a way, werewolf sightings and stories aren't as more common as, say, other supernatural stories like ghosts and things like that, but they are still around.
One thing did become clear when researching this video. The story of the werewolf of Dogdyke, or Langrick, may be well over a century old in its recorded form, but it certainly isn't the last time people have claimed to encounter something unusual in Lincolnshire. Every so often, another account does seem to surface, but it's rare. In 2004, the mayor of Market Raisin recalled how he and his wife saw what he described as a black beast, larger than an Alsatian, leap into the road in front of their car before disappearing as quickly as it happened. Near Woodhill Spa, another witness told of walking his dog when the animal suddenly stopped, growled and refused to go any further. Moments later, he reported seeing a large black creature with bright yellow eyes standing on the path ahead. Before he could make sense of what he was looking at, it bounded across a nearby field and vanished. There have been other reports too, around Louth and Horncastle, and people have described glimpsing unusually large black animals lying in the grass, crossing lonely roads, or disappearing into hedgerows before they could be properly identified. Of course, none of those accounts prove the existence of werewolves. Large dogs, poor light, distance, fleeting glimpses, and our own imaginations have probably created more than a few local legends over the years. And then, of course, there's the big cat sightings, which we've discussed before on the video at Cannock Chase. That is a possible theory for some of them, but obviously it doesn't explain the werewolf again. Now, whether the werewolf of Dogdyke belongs alongside those more recent sightings, or whether it should remain exactly where we first found it, as an old fenland tale, it's something I will leave entirely up to you. But in the meantime, I would genuinely love to know, have you ever heard a werewolf story from Lincolnshire, or perhaps another part of Britain? Maybe a strange encounter that's been passed down through your own family, or even something you've experienced yourself. If so, let me know in the comments below, because if there's one thing I've learned while making this video, it's that the oldest legends are rarely the ones people stop talking about.
So that's it. Thank you to everybody for watching. Let me know in the comments if you've got any other werewolf stories that I've not included, or if what you think about this. Do you believe, are you one of the 70% that don't believe in werewolves, or are you the other percentage? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Anyway, next week, because we visit a new site each week, we try to. So next week we're staying in Lincolnshire, and I'm going to try and uncover a folklore story that I've since found might have a little bit of truth to it. So that, I'm not giving any more than that away, but if you want to watch that, make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and don't have nightmares.